Going on Jerome's Raw Real Car rant yet again. And yes, quarterback of the future is extremely important, and the Vikings have to get that right. Mainly because, hey, you're going to run back with Kirk for a year or two. You're going to stick and pick a quarterback. You're going to make a move for a quarterback. You're going to maneuver day two in the potentially the deepest quarterback class in NFL history. It's all good. And quarterback is the most important position in all of team sports. But something that's been really irking me as of late, and it's been an issue with the Vikings from Kevin O'Connell back through the final years of Zimmer, is the Vikings getting pushed around along the defensive line. And yes, quarterback, and it's a passer and get the passer league. But bottom line, if you lose at the line of scrimmage and on defense, if you're constantly moving backwards, you're going to lose. And the Vikings defensive line for years has been rather suspect, right? And of course, the anecdote that the Vikings haven't spent a first or second round pick on D-line since 2013 in Sharif Floyd, which what could have been? What could have been, man? But I mean, this should be institutionalized, like in our DNA, in the double helix by now, because we are the team of the Purple People Eaters with Gary Larson and Alan Page and Jim Marshall and Carl Eller just bringing the heat. I mean, that was the backbone. Yes, Fran Tarkenton. Yes, Chuck Foreman. Yes, everyone, man. But it really was that defensive line that got after that ass. They shut down the run. They got after the quarterback. And if you do that, it's game over. And what's now in vogue is that quick interior pass rush, and quarterbacks, they don't like heat in the A or B gap. And if you can shut down the run, it really limits the options, right? And all of a sudden, hey, if you get a pass rush on a quarterback, magically your cornerbacks start to look pretty good, because they only have to cover 1.8 seconds versus 3.1, all that stuff. But you go from that. And also, you had some great defensive linemen through the 80s and the 90s with Keith Millard and Henry Thomas, who, I mean, Henry Thomas had an insane number of sacks for a true nose tackle. It was amazing, man. And of course, Chris Dolman, and then you got to John Randall and all that stuff. And then you got into the Williams-Wall era. Kevin Williams, stud, should be a Hall of Famer. Pat Williams coming over as a free agent from the Bills, stuffing the run, baby, just getting after it. Star caps, let's go. Right. And I mean, the Vikings during the Williams-Wall era, they had Jared Allen, they had, Ray Edwards, and then they drafted Brian Robinson and Everson Griffin. So they got after your ass, man. But, the last 2 years with O'Connell, yes, the shifting to the 3-man front and the 3-4, it will take some time to change over personnel and get everyone used to their new spots. But even the last couple of years with Zimmer, where, I mean, the Vikings had some great defensive lines with when Zimmer's defense was peak, spearheaded by Linval Joseph, just absolutely getting it in the middle. And then he had Daniil and B-Rob and Everson on the outside, and everything was all good. All right, but Linval eventually aged out, and eventually moved on. And the Vikings defensive line last couple of years, Harrison Phillips is out there. He's playing his ass off, yes, but if you've been subscribed to this channel for any amount of time, you know that right when they signed Harrison Phillips, and the talk of them with Ed Donatel moving to the 3-4 defense is like, this is great if Harrison Phillips plays 4-tech, 5-tech, so a 3-4 defensive end. He's not a nose tackle. And what has Harrison Phillips done basically the last 2 years? He's played nose tackle. And if you want a 3-man front, you got to have a 330, 340-pound mofo mountain that you cannot move. A guy that's going to throw the center back into the lap of the quarterbacks. We've seen that. Yeah. As well as someone who can commandeer both A-gaps, someone who can absorb multiple offensive lineman bodies, who could take on a center and a fullback, a center and a guard, and keep your linebackers clean. That's exactly what you need. And I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it, because especially when it's time for big boy football, late in, I guess early in the year, but late in the season, when that weather gets cold and when you need a yard, guess what? If your defense can't stop anyone, if you can't stop the run, if you can't get your own pass rush, you're done. You're done. Because at the end of the day, like, football is extremely simple. Can you stop the other team from advancing the ball? And if you can't, you're not going to go very far. And you can have all the bells and whistles. You can have your fancy quarterback. You can have your receivers. You can have everything, man. But if you consistently lose ground at the line of scrimmage, you're going to lose. And it's been an issue with the Vikings the last couple of years. And you could say regime change and scheme change, but the Vikings opened this season with Harrison Phillips at the nose and Dean Lowry and Jonathan Bullard as your defensive ends. Now, again, no shade or hate towards them, but Lowry, a little bit past his prime, as well as Jonathan Bullard, more of a run stuffer than a guy who can create his own pass rush. So it's been tough. And you hope for guys like Jaquelin Roy to get after it. But the Vikings, it's besides quarterback, which is obviously always a need, but D-line should be the number one priority for the Vikings this offseason. I'm talking about they need to go hard in the paint after Christian Wilkins, reunite him with Brian Flores, give him $20 million a year. I do not care. They do need to re-sign Danielle Hunter. Yes, they can make all of this stuff work and potentially bring back Kirk and Justin Jefferson because of Rob Thug Life Brzezinski. Don't worry about it. It will be fine. Everything's going to be all right. And also, it's really important, too, because the Vikings moved on from some of those veteran contracts, really freed up cap space for this season and beyond, but that's beside the point. And then this draft, like, there's not really any high-end defensive interiors, but it is thick. THICC of second, third, fourth round guys who are going to contribute. And to a degree, it's sort of like the edge rusher class where, there's not a top 5, top 10 surefire edge rusher in this class, but I mean, there's, a dozen, 14 edge rushers who will come in and compete and be able to contribute right away. And the Vikings, if they lose Danielle, obviously edge rusher becomes a massive priority. But right now, defensive line is a massive priority. I mean, Harrison Phillips is solid, but I would love if he plays more of a 4-tech, 5-tech, or 3-tech, or maybe like a sub-package nose tackle, but not early downs. Like, if you need to stop a fourth and inches, if you need to stop a tush push, like, I want more meat in the middle, man. And with Kyrus Tongas, like, how come he played so sparingly? I don't understand it. But the Vikings also need to go hard on defensive line. And we're talking about Jazon Newton from Illinois. We're talking about the Texas dudes, Byron Murphy II. Talk about my guy, Tavondre Sweat. We're talking about Chris Jenkins from Michigan. We're talking about Howard Cross III from Notre Dame. We need playmakers on the inside. And that's what it comes down to, man. We need guys who can stop the run. We need guys who can generate their own pass rush, because it can't just be Danielle versus the rest of the world. And an inconvenient truth about the Vikings defense this year, their pressure rate, rather low. So they weren't consistently getting off of blocks and getting after the quarterback, which precipitated Flores having to blitz, the highest blitz percentage in the league. And yeah, it was great for guys like Metellus. It was great for guys like Ivan Pace Jr., but also that can leave you exposed on the back end if you don't get heat. All right, so that's what it comes down to. And it could have to be a multi-year thing, but remember the whole trope that, Spielman ignores the offensive line, even though he didn't. Even though the Vikings sunk free agent money and high draft picks into the offensive line, Spielman and Kwesi definitely ignored the defensive line. So they got to get after it, free agency. They got to get after it in the draft. They have to rebuild that bully along the line of scrimmage. We have the meats, Vikemodium, stop the runs, all that stuff. That's where it starts and ends. We have to get back to the team that literally is the Purple People Eaters. We need to have offensive line rooms fear the Vikings whenever they're on the schedule, or they see them coming up in the playoffs. Playoffs. That's right, man. That's where it starts and ends. And if the Vikings can do that, figure out their estate planning at quarterback, and then build a fat-ass defensive line, pun intended, baby, you got a stew going. Anyways, that's it. Raw real rant. You know what to do. Skull production value.